This episode is brought to you by Oberle Risk Strategies, the insurance brokerage and insurance diligence provider that's been trusted by investors, lenders, searchers, and CEOs for over a decade now. The company is led by August Felker, himself a two-time searcher within both the funded and the self-funded models. He personally runs Oberle's dedicated search fund practice that works with searchers across the entire diligence, purchase, and post-close process. Their diligence offering, which is completely free, by the way, will assess your target company's insurance program and will summarize any potential coverage gaps, the pro forma insurance pricing, and any changes needed for closing or shortly thereafter. In 9 out of every 10 client engagements, they're able to either reduce spend or improve coverage, all in such a way that the searcher or CEO can focus on other things while Oberle handles all things insurance for them. Oberle has serviced over 900 customers across a decade of operation and has an NPS score that puts them at the very top of their industry. But don't take my word for it. Click on the hyperlink located within today's episode description, and we will gladly put you in touch with as many happy Oberle customers as you'd like. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of In the Trenches. I am your host, as always, Steve Davidkos. So today's episode is targeted specifically towards those who are considering the acquisition of a software company, and I was thrilled to be joined by Chris Smith, the managing partner of Spellbound, a company that helps acquirers with technical due diligence, fractional CTO services, and outsourced development services, among other things. Much of what we discuss today is intended to uncover how much technical debt any given target may possess within their code base. And for those who may be unaware of the term, don't worry, we define what technical debt is very early in our conversation. Though substantially every software company has some amount of technical debt, those that are weighed down by an asymmetric burden of it tend to ship code less frequently, release fewer newer features and spend more time fixing bugs, regularly miss their release targets, possess code bases that are difficult to build upon, have slower implementations, and just generally be much more expensive and capital intensive to operate and grow. In this way, what start out as technical problems quickly accumulate and become significant business problems. Too much technical debt can significantly impair the ability of an acquirer to grow a business and can necessitate additional time, cost, and energy not originally contemplated in the initial investment thesis. As a result, prospective acquirers would be well served to thoroughly diligence the amount of technical debt possessed by any given target company and proceed very carefully, or perhaps not even proceed at all, with those companies who seem to possess much more than their fair share of it. Before we dive into today's episode, allow me to conclude with my usual reminder that I'm an active investor in search funds and the companies that they acquire through my fund, Mineola Search Partners. And if you tuned into the brief episode that we published last week, you'll be familiar with the fact that we just concluded the first close for Mineola's second fund, which will again be investing in search funds and the small businesses that they acquire across North America. So if you're interested in raising a search fund yourself, or if you are interested in investing alongside me within the search fund asset class, I'd welcome the opportunity to speak with you. But for now, I hope you enjoyed today's conversation with Chris Smith. Chris Smith, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Appreciate you having me.
Excited to talk to you. And the 2013 version of me would be particularly excited to talk to you because I acquired a software company. As to call me a non-technical purchaser would probably be understatement of the century. I'm not sure that I could have spelled the word software when I first acquired a software company. And that had a lot of implications for the purchase process, the diligence process, and my first probably 24 months as a CEO. So I am really looking forward to this opportunity to hopefully demystify a lot of the technical specific components of diligence. But before we get to all of that, let's start with the basics. Maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself and your career and what you're doing today.
Yeah, sure. Career started a long time ago, and I started kind of developing and programming back in my mid-teens, maybe around 13, 14, and always just had a love for tech and how things worked and wanted to try and figure out how to make things different or modify things. And it's kind of led me to always being a bit curious and looking for kind of weird opportunities. So my career has just been a series of just right place, right time, meeting cool people and working on solving cool problems. I did my first startup. I was 20 at the time, long time ago, and kind of the e-commerce space and distribution space, and that went well, and then got into marketing and sales and kind of digital marketing space for a number of years, and then into television, more in particular in the sports arena and like motorsports, so for like racing and things like that. And then that spawned another startup opportunity with a couple of guys in the interactive TV space, and so spent about 4 years in that startup before exiting that, and 4 years before that just in the TV media kind of entertainment space. So it's been kind of all over the place. And then after that, went and helped kind of revamp some like a beverage ERP startup that needed some help after their Series A. So helped them for a little bit there, and then kind of landed kind of doing diligence work in the search fund space, and through some contacts kind of figured out what search funds were, and this cool little ecosystem that existed that I had no idea was there, and found a really cool way to help, kind of to your point, demystify tech, and to kind of help take a business lens and apply it to technology to give comfort and, making investment, what risks exist, how to even run something that you're unfamiliar with, in the first year or two, and kind of just be a good backstop and partner to people like yourself who maybe now are tech adjacent, but maybe starting out we're very much away from that.
So the bulk of our conversation today is going to be around this concept of technical debt. And I think before we get into the nuances of technical debt, it's appropriate to start with a definition of it, because many people listening to this might be hearing that term for the very first time. So maybe to begin with, at its most basic level, what is technical debt and why is it important for prospective acquirers to understand?
Yeah, it's a bit of a nuanced answer, but I think to break it down in the most basic, it's a way that a company has taken a pragmatic choice to take a shortcut, or to maybe prioritize speed of delivery over properly developing a technical solution. And it's not always bad. It really just kind of comes down to balance. But I think what we find a lot happens is the typical model of, MVP becomes production. And so therefore, there wasn't the time to figure out, okay, there's a product market fit, or there's something here. So let's go back and actually make it production ready, or iterate through some of the cases that would make it robust and scalable, or financially viable, so you're not overspending on your tech budget to serve the customers that you're now, onboarding to this new piece of technology. So I'd say in its most basic form, it's really just concessions that have been made, poor technical maintenance practices, maybe valuing go-to-market strategy over delivering carefully. And so it can kind of manifest in a lot of different ways.
I remember my CTO always used to characterize technical debt as the accumulated effect of making too many make it work decisions and not enough make it right decisions, which is all to say that you're prioritizing speed over quality. And once or twice, or perhaps more than that, you can get away with that. But the accumulated effect of too many decisions like that create a slug of debt, so to speak, that ultimately needs
Yeah.
to get repaid.
Yeah, we call that in the tech field, we call it stacking band-aids, because at some point they're going to fall over and you're still left with the root problem that you didn't solve, but you kind of tried to patch your way through. Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it.
So, I mean, before we hit record, we talked about this, and I think anyone in software can tell you that every software company has some level of technical debt. But I guess the question to you is, how should buyers think about how much is too much versus the amount that they should expect to see versus the amount that they should just be begrudgingly willing to live with? How do they think about that question?
Yeah, it's kind of tricky. We like to think about it from the standpoint of what's your investment thesis. If you're making 4 to 6 key bets that need to ring true in the next 3 to 7 years, that your investment in purchase of this company has been a good one, then that's the lens at which we think about technical debt from our standpoint, because you will always find something. There's always the challenge or balance that a business has to use the three levers that they can only pull two of, which is cost, quality, and speed. And so a lot of times it's, cost is a concern. So it's speed and maybe quality suffers. And so therefore you kind of, that manifests as technical debt in some form or fashion. So if you back it into, why are you excited about the business? What do you hope to happen in the next 3 to 7 years? We look at technical debt on, will it prevent or slow down your plans for growth?
Right.
Would it or could it discourage customers from being onboarded? Does it make it impossible to implement better or cheaper technologies? Are you kind of locked into something that maybe is a bit more difficult to work with? The talent pool is harder to hire for. Would you require strategic hires to reduce or handle some of the most concerning technical debt that kind of goes against the bets that you're making in purchasing the business?
Can you talk to this idea? So, I guess as a rookie software acquirer, and certainly as a rookie software CEO, I naively thought that technical debt was a technical problem. However, what I came to learn is that technical debt, while its origins were indeed technical nature, it manifested into like a business and commercial problem. So, the company that we purchased certainly had a lot of technical debt. And the way that that manifested was we shipped code less frequently. We had more time spending bugs, less time releasing new features and functions. We missed release targets pretty frequently. We had slower implementations. Like generally, it was just slower and more expensive and more capital intensive to operate and grow. So what started out feeling like a purely technical problem very quickly morphed into like a business and commercial problem that I had to manage as the CEO. Can you just talk about that concept and how technical debt isn't solely technical in nature?
Yeah. Yeah, it could be even process driven too. If the left hand's not talking to the right hand or is throwing things over the wall, meaning maybe product or business is just tossing things over to tech and letting them kind of just run with it without being closely aligned with what the acceptance criteria is. The best way to empower a technology team to deliver is to let them understand, what do you want to accomplish? What are the business objectives? And most importantly, why do you want to accomplish that? What value or impact is it going to drive? And then give technologists the room to kind of define how you're going to get there in partnership with the business. So that way, technical strategy, everyone's going in eyes wide open. What are we doing? What concessions do we need to make now? How do we address it in the future? But from a process standpoint, it does kind of slow things down. You talk about a high bug rate. And so, that could manifest in a lot of different ways, which is why we dig in, not just to tech debt at the surface, but we're looking at the team process, development process, product development process, which would be kind of different from the software side, and how those two work together, even down to customer support, to understand, are there inflection points when they deliver releases? Is there an influx in customer support requests, which then pull developers off task to go and chase those things down or manifest in more bugs? What's the customer onboarding process look like, and how can that be streamlined to help support business growth and future improvements? So it's more than just this software is out of date or contains a known security vulnerability. I think that's a major aspect of it, but those are typically low-hanging fruit and easy to address, but more the issues that are a bit more challenging and take some time and care are in making sure that there's appropriate process. I don't think doing process for process sake is helpful, but at least making sure that everybody knows how to row in the same direction and know how to support each other and support what the business objectives and common goals are. And there's usually a disjointed approach is what we find, which then manifests in poor technical decisions or mismanagement and upkeep of technical systems that then later on have larger implications when you need to scale or need to grow or need to pivot.
So I've read as an investor, I've read many of your technical due diligence reports, and one thing that you guys do that I really like is I think it's towards the end of the report, you benchmark the current company against the universe of other similarly sized companies that you've seen. So this is about average, this is better than average, this is worse than average.
Mm-hmm.
Can you start by illuminating for us what does a quote unquote typical level of technical debt look like within a quote unquote typical search acquired software company? Let's start there.
Yeah, I think we've looked at a lot of different size companies in the search market over the number of years. And I think a lot of what stands out is typically outdated or unsupported software components. If it's a web framework or a language that's being used, usually the decision was made at the time of inception, this is the path we're going. And then that was never revisited or ever maintained. And so technology is organic, and whatever you build has to be maintained. And therefore, If things are out of date, that opens you up to potential security vulnerabilities, to bugs in the software. And a lot of software providers or maintainers of software products that are open source kind of have this concept of, supported version. So typically, we would call it LTS, or kind of the longer supported version, that would be kind of you would want to be on. So therefore, you wouldn't have to keep updating your software frequently. It's something that they're going to support for a longer duration than maybe some of their other versions. And that will allow the company to have confidence that, things are not outdated. So outdated unsupported components are one thing we see. Those are usually low hanging fruit, but the longer the drift is between major releases, so if you're maybe 4 versions behind, it may be breaking changes to get current and to be able to have support from the vendor of that software, or to get bug fixes or security patches. And so that type of technical debt may require a rewrite or a big technology shift, more so than if they were to just keep up with that. So we see that often. I would say the other piece that we often see too, and this is more of a kind of go back to those 3 levers, moving fast and not wanting to spend a lot, so quality gets sacrificed a little bit, is customer specific logic. And the reason that's bad is it doesn't scale well over time, and it makes the system potentially more fragile. And in some instances, if the customer specific logic is on the database layer, then that creates a program that's database bound. And usually, depending on the technology selected, that could be one of the more costly layers to expand as the customer base grows. So we find that often. Maybe good technical documentation is another form of technical debt. It's slower to onboard people. It's more taxing on the team to mentor and bring new developers up to speed. Creates a higher reliance on key people, knowledge concentration risks, and then just supporting legacy systems that maybe should be sunset or deprecated. Those are, I think, some of the higher kind of points we typically run across in diligence.
So again, going to this back to this concept that technical debt has its origins in the underlying technology, but manifests into business problems. My observation from acquiring my company is, sure, we had plenty of technical debt at the code level, but I would say we had, I don't even know what to call this, like process debt. And specifically, we had no product management discipline whatsoever. The product management function resided primarily with the selling founder. And at the time, we had very little QA, and whatever QA we had was very manual as opposed to being automated. Now, as an investor, when I read these technical diligence reports and I ask entrepreneurs about how they decide what features and functions to release and why and what the business case behind it is, it's clear to me that, like, in the overwhelming majority of cases, there kind of is no product management process or team or discipline to speak of. And that in and of itself creates what appears to be technical debt. Can you just talk about the extent to which that's consistent or maybe inconsistent with your experience?
I'd say it's pretty consistent. All the companies in the search space we look at typically lack that key role of someone as a product owner that is responsible to convey what the product strategy and vision is in a way that technologists can act on that and make good, strong technical decisions. Because I think it's okay to make a pragmatic choice for certain reasons that are attached to business value, in the sense of, maybe you want to choose that this isn't maybe the best technical solution, but it will solve the needs now, and this is how we're going to address it in the future. As long as a technologist can see over the horizon for where we're going, then I think that's helpful. And a lot of that is typically missed in a lot of these search fund specific targets, because they were kind of started a long time ago and kind of found something that maybe they didn't expect, and have kind of just organically grown into hiring a couple of developers or working with an offshore team, and therefore haven't really slowed down to see, okay, well, we're building this. How do we maintain and be good stewards of the tech we're building, and how do we curate that over time? So that's a lot of our recommendations are typically to get really close and make sure there's a well-defined vision for where the business is going and why, and then that is aligned with good product strategy that will then translate to technical action.
You began our conversation but by very rightly, in my opinion, saying that the amount of technical debt that you should be willing to live with kind of depends on your investment thesis, which I think is entirely consistent with my own experience. So let's kind of jump into a hypothetical. Let's say you complete a technical diligence process
Hmm.
And the company in question, it turns out that they have higher than average technical debt. I think I know your answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyways.
Yeah, sure.
When a buyer is in receipt of that diligence report, should they automatically kill the opportunity? Why or why not?
Well, I can tell you the position we take, and I would encourage any searcher or investor to hold their vendors accountable in this way that we will never tell you you should or shouldn't buy a business. It's more around outlining, you know, identifying and making sense of their risks and anchoring that to your investment thesis and to your go forward plan. I mean, it's one of the reasons that we like to give a bit of a 180-day action plan for us is there's going to be a lot coming at you as a new operator. And you're trying to learn the business, learn the different personalities, try and figure out what changes you need to make or shouldn't make. And if you're non-technical or maybe tech adjacent, then this kind of black box mythical technology land may be a little bit hard to reason about. So we really want to give you a bit of an anchor point to, yeah, there's a lot of opportunity, but if you focus in these key areas, this will move the needle based on how you're thinking of success with the business. So I'd say it kind of depends. It depends on what your key bets are and how what we find will either impact in a positive or negative way. And sometimes if you find a lot of key bet, it may be something we can dive into a little bit later, but that may be a good angle for renegotiating or for reconsidering the financial model, how you're thinking about hiring and maybe who you keep within the organization once you transition in, and kind of identifying skill gaps, because maybe it's as simple as just getting the right people in for 6 months to address those things. So it may look, large and insurmountable on the surface, but in reality, it may be easily addressable with like a 6 month time frame. And maybe that's acceptable based on what your growth plans are for the business in the first year.
So maybe just to double click on that a little bit, I'll kind of outline two almost caricatures of a software investment thesis that I've seen. In investment thesis one, it's a very growth oriented thesis. So we pay a mid single digit revenue of multiple. We go in all equity, no debt. There's little to perhaps no EBITDA to speak of. We over equitize the balance sheet by putting some cash on it because we think we're going to have to spend a bunch of money, which is all to say that in order for the searchers and her investor group to hit the IRR, it has to be a growth dominant thesis. So
Mm-hmm.
that would be kind of thesis A. Thesis B is kind of the opposite. We pay a much lower price. We use some debt. We have more EBITDA to play with. And it's just a lower growth thesis. We can have multiple expansion. We can have the benefits of leverage. We can grow modestly and kind of still hit our returns. I guess as you look at a 100,000 foot view, investment thesis A and investment thesis B, which thesis should we be more worried about from a technical debt perspective? Like, does technical debt pose more of a problem in A than B, or is it too difficult to say?
I don't think it's too difficult to say. I think in scenario A, it kind of depends on what the technical debt is. If you're looking at a business that's in the midst of a platform rewrite, or they're trying to migrate customers from an on-premise solution so that they can sunset that to a cloud-hosted solution to get better economies of scale, but that's not quite done yet, then maybe you would, in that instance, put some kind of holdback in place to make sure that the conditions are, this needs to be completed within X amount of time, or you have some leverage within, with the sellers to maybe recoup something from that perspective. I think for scenario, option B or scenario B, where you're looking at more of a slow play and you're okay with modest growth, then it's really more around how well positioned is the target to maintain what they have with, growth of customer base or growth, whatever scale is. If scale is, increased number of transactions or increased customer count, we're thinking about things from how quickly do they onboard customers? What's their support volume and what is that trending like? And how does that scale as a customer base increases? Is the software positioned to handle that scale efficiently? Or will it require any kind of major overhaul? So it kind of depends on what technical debt we find. And again, it's always anchored to for us at least, and not such a black and white world where this is good or bad technical practice. Because I think if you've been in the tech field long enough, everyone's going to make concessions. Everyone's going to make a pragmatic decision. And it should always be anchored with some type of business decision as to why that technical decision was made. And so we're just trying to get to the why behind that and understand what impact that has for you and your growth strategy with the business moving forward, I think is the most important piece. And I think coming out of that, you'll understand, is it a huge financial commitment in the first year, or is it more we're going to slow down here because we have to remediate some things to better position and prop us up for the growth and scale we're thinking of? So it really just comes back to trying to figure out, is it worth it to make that investment, and do you have the, you know, fortitude to see this transition through because of what it's going to unlock? And I think that kind of applies in both scenarios, just a little differently depending on how fast you need to unlock that performance of the business.
When you talked about how any given decision has some level of trade-off in it, I'm reminded of the triangle that my CTO used to draw on our whiteboards. And that triangle would have speed, quality, and scope. And he would say,
Mm-hmm.
pick two because you can't have all three.
Yep. Yeah, we like the lever methodology because you have two hands and there's three levers. Which two are you going to pull at any given
Yeah.
time? And it usually helps put things in perspective because there has to be a trade-off always.
Yeah. Okay. So you've rightly suggested that the amount of technical debt that we can and should be willing to shoulder depends on the investment thesis. So let's try to get a bit more tactical. At the most tactical level, how should buyers account for higher levels of technical debt in their underwriting process? Is it as simple as a lower entry multiple? Is it in their model, they have a larger dev or QA team post-close? Do we plan for slower release cycles? Do we say in our first 2 years, we're going to replatform, so we're going to acquire fewer customers? All of the above, none of the above, like at the most tactical level, how do we account for technical debt within the confines of an investment thesis?
Yeah, it could be like we spoke about earlier, maybe a lower acquisition multiple. If the technical debt's greater than what the client originally believed, from our standpoint, then or the target company maybe represented it differently than what we ended up finding, then at least you can estimate and how many dollars in engineering costs will be required, over a specific amount of time to remediate that, if the remediation is urgent or necessary. And again, anchored to what your investment thesis is, maybe an earn back or earn out or hold back clause, to kind of make sure that certain key tasks are completed within a reasonable amount of time after the close. And that could be, like we talked about, transitioning customers from on-prem to cloud. Maybe, they're well positioned for growth, but they still are pulling kind of a boat anchor of a certain cohort of customers that just are reluctant to move from cloud, or they can't because it's so time intensive for the target company to make those transitions that's holding them back from scale. Then maybe the plan is, okay, well, this has to be done within this time, or there's some type of holdback clause in place. You may have to adjust your growth plans, and refactor the extent of how long you're willing to wait before you can really start pouring gas on the fire, so to speak. You may have, like you mentioned, a need for strategic hires, and so that you have to kind of plan that in as to, okay, well, who do you need? How much is it going to cost? Can it be fractional? Can I outsource it? Does it need to be a direct hire? Which then, depending on the role, if it's a CTO or some higher level role like a VP of engineering, is there some type of compensation package beyond just a base rate that you need to factor in within that? There may also be items we identify that just require, we would call it kind of a research spike, where you just are going to have to spend some time getting in the trenches and going deeper. That isn't really feasible to be done in a diligence setting. And you may have to budget time and resources for that too.
Like, I think my observation is that a lot of the investment theses that I see specific to software and specific to situations where there's a meaningful amount of technical debt is that I don't feel like it's often properly accounted for in the model and in the forecast. So, for example, let's say that you guys identify, hey, there's a lot of technical debt. We're working on deprecated technology. The code base is old and one size fits all monstrosity, et cetera, et cetera. We need to replatform in a meaningful way. What you often see, even in spite of that, is okay, well, developer salaries used to be 20% of sales. Now they're 22% of sales. We used to release one product a year. We're still going to release one product a year. We used to acquire 10 new logos a year. We're still going to acquire 10 new logos a year. And for me, that feels like a lot of the same. And it doesn't properly account for the fact that, hey, we got a ton of work to do here. So, maybe we have to double the size of the development team. Maybe we have to release no products next year. Maybe instead of acquiring 10 customers per year on average, we're going to acquire one customer per year for the next 24 months. And if the numbers still pencil out at the end of year 4, 5, 6, or 7, then we can kind of comfortably say that we've accounted for the technical debt and all the work that we have to do and the lack of speed that we might have, particularly in the early years, maybe the lower margins that we're going to have in the early years. If I see something like that as an investor, I can say, okay, we're going in eyes wide open. We know it's going to be a slog for some period of time, but the numbers still pencil out. Is that consistent with your experience? Do you often see it like properly baked into the investment thesis, or is it kind of like glazed over by no fault of their own from a non-technical purchaser?
Yes, A, you're thinking about it right. B, I think a lot of searchers we work with either are scared by pursuing anything that I wouldn't even call it a software company, but just tech enabled company. Maybe it's a
Yeah.
services company that uses off the shelf software, or they make their own in house tooling, but the product they're selling is a service or some type of managed service or something. But they're not thinking about it in that way. So they don't. I'd say what we like to do when we help them go through the key bets exercise as part of our process. Once we meet the target and kind of get a lay of the land, we love looking at sims or any type of investment material that's non-technical. Just it helps us really get into the headspace of where the investor or searchers is at and why they're excited about the business. And then we spend a lot of meaningful time with our clients trying to kind of help unpack that and help frame here are technical key bets that complement your investment thesis that help you think through those types of things. So when you're telling me things like, we're okay scaling, this is what growth looks like, then we're looking at what we know about the business to date or what they're kind of informing us of and trying to think through, all right, these are the things you should be looking at, or here's the lens that we can take to use that same filter to look at the business and help you understand, is that reasonable? Do you need to adjust expectations that maybe year one doesn't look like you think it needs to look? And then it's really up to them to work with their advisory board, investor group, whoever is helping with this kind of thought process to figure out, okay, does that still model out and does that still work? And so we try and always encourage that. I'd say it's a bit of a mixed bag. Sometimes we see clients showing up and they're already thinking that way and gotten really good counsel. And other times we can kind of help them back into that. But our goal is always to leave our clients with the ability to kind of have a full picture across both tech and the rest of the business. And so we really care about learning more than just the small little area that we dig into from a diligence standpoint, because it really helps influence how to plan for the future and how to make sure that you're modeling things appropriately. You're not going to be surprised after 6 months into business of like, oh, I wish I knew this, or I would have thought about this differently if I had this context. We're really trying to kind of help seed that early on.
This episode is brought to you by Boulay. Now, for those of you who operate within the search fund ecosystem, you probably already know that Boulay is the standard when it comes to quality of earnings reports, tax, and audit services. But for those of you who are newer to the community, consider this. Over the past 20 years, Boulay has worked directly with hundreds of search funds from capital raise to exit, currently assisting over 150 funds in the search phase and another 125 in the operating phase. They work with searchers across the entirety of the ETA journey, from issuing K1s to your investors during the search phase, all the way through to helping prepare your books for an exit at the conclusion of the operating phase. They are the industry leader in performing financial due diligence and creating Q of E reports that your investors can rely on. They provide a full suite of tax services, both for your search fund and for the acquired company. They perform the annual audits required by most debt and equity investors. And they also perform outsourced accounting services, acting as a fractional bookkeeper and controller for those companies whose needs might not necessitate full-time in-house resources. In short, you can safely assume that these guys get it. They've grown up in the search fund ecosystem over the past 20 years, and they have the reputation to prove it. To learn more, go to boulaygroup.com. That's BOULAY group.com. One more follow-up on tactically, how does one go about kind of baking technical debt into an investment thesis? When I do see buyers account for technical debt in an investment thesis, almost always one of their answers is we're going to hire more developers. In a way that makes good intuitive sense. However, many years ago, I wrote a blog post. I called it "The Biggest Temptation of a Software CEO." It was a cheeky little play off Patrick Lencioni's book, "The Biggest Temptation of a CEO." And I said that the biggest temptation of a software CEO is to throw bodies at problems, specifically
Yep.
engineers. And I'm
Especially in
reminded
something you
of,
don't understand too. You're just
oh,
quick to
100%.
want to just, you know, mass influx of new talent and let them figure it out.
Exactly. And I'm reminded of, for anyone who hasn't read this yet, you absolutely have to. A product management guru, for lack of a better way to put it, Rich Mironov, wrote a four-part article called The Four Laws of Software Economics. And law number one is your dev team will never, ever, 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 ever be big enough. And so that was, I mean, that couldn't have resonated more with my experience as a software CEO. My question to you is it sufficient for a prospective acquirer to say, we realize we have some technical debt. Our dev team of four is going to become a dev team of eight post close. Therefore, we'll be just fine. Can you just talk to the extent to which that is sufficient or insufficient as, how one bakes technical debt and the realities of technical debt into an investment thesis?
Yeah, I mean, team scale is an easy one on paper, I think. Um, it it's kind of nuanced when it comes down to, well, how do you rightfully position that team and point them in the right direction? How do you hold them accountable and have visibility into the quality of output and the performance? And I think that comes down to, we were talking about earlier, process maturity is a form of technical debt in itself. And if you don't have the right muscle memory in place, then it doesn't matter how much you throw at it, you're not going to develop in the way that you need to. And so you need to kind of slow down to speed up. And I think it's like kind of crawl, walk, run approach. If you know that you're inefficient on the process side, then how do you build in the right controls and the right guardrails to fully unlock a technology team to move at a pretty good pace? And
Yeah.
yes, you can always throw more resources at it, but if you don't have the right structure in place to guide those resources in an effective way or to monitor to make sure that things are moving appropriately from a velocity standpoint, you have no way to really gauge the quality output or really no way to understand, are we at capacity? Are we making the right choices from a business standpoint to make sure that we're focusing on the right things? Or are we just throwing a bunch of asks in there and changing, moving the goalpost constantly, which is going to be very difficult for a technology team to keep up or to be able to make good technical decisions in the midst of that. So I think
Yeah.
having good
Yeah.
process in place first, good leadership is going to be really key. And then just bringing them along the vision. Technologists are very curious and love solving problems and want to be able to anchor their work to some type of impact, mostly to the business of, what are we trying to accomplish? And now I can look and see how my hard work manifested in that. And so then they can kind of celebrate in the wins with the rest of the business team.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I would also just say from my experience that like increasing the size of the dev team or the QA team is probably part of how one accounts for technical debt and investment thesis, but it can't account for the majority of how we deal with it. Like doubling the size of your engineering team doesn't mean you're going to be releasing twice as fast, doesn't mean your bugs are going to be cut in half, doesn't mean that you're going to replatform twice as quickly. I mean, the world just isn't that linear, and certainly
Yeah.
not in a software context where customers seem to have like an unquenchable thirst for new features and new functions and changes.
Yeah. It's the difference between treating the symptoms or looking for the root cause. And so
Yeah.
if you know you have certain problems with the dev team delivering, then it's not, well, we'll throw more people at it because it's a capacity issue. It's how do you validate that? What's the root cause of them being able to, deliver with confidence? And so it's kind of a multi-prong approach across more than just the development team and themselves. It's the processes and the leadership and input leading up to that. Because any tech team, it's garbage in, garbage out. It's kind of the approach.
So many years ago, I wrote a blog post on how non-technical acquirers can identify how much technical debt may reside within the code base of their target company. And I organize these by high risk, medium risk, and low risk. So high risk means like strong indicator of technical debt. Medium risk means a likely indicator of technical debt. Low risk means maybe it suggests that technical debt's there, but is not a sign in and of itself. So if you're game, I'd love to go through a bit of a lightning round with you.
Yeah,
Run
sure.
through the red, yellow, and green flags, and just tell me, do you agree or disagree with its classification? Does
Okay.
that work for you?
Yeah, I'm game. Let's do it.
Okay. Okay, so let's start with high risk. These are the things that, in my experience, suggested a high degree of technical debt. So looking back at the company's historical release cycles, percentage of releases dedicated to maintenance versus innovation What do you think?
Yeah, I'd say that that is a strong indicator of process inefficiencies. And it makes me curious as to why, like what's driving the maintenance issues. It's typically a fragile system or lack of accountability, changing requirements from the business typically manifest in challenges there. So I'd say it's a strong indicator for sure. And
Okay.
I'd say it's a strong indicator that you're going to need to make investments in more than just the technology itself.
Right. Yeah. And I think like the intuitive common sense question is if you're not releasing new products every year, why not? Right.
Yeah.
Now, the seller could come up with a perfectly reasonable commercial answer, but if it's clear that the entire capacity of their engineering team has just been spent fixing problems and acquiescing to customer one-off requests, then that certainly starts to smell very technical debt to me.
Yeah, that's why we do offer for searchers kind of doing a bit of an introduction call before really committing to tech diligence, just to like we do two things. One, we have a list of starter questions that hopefully help surface some of these things. And we really encourage like pre-LOI, do that just to get a sense for what are the early smells of potential issues around, the people side or the process side or even the technology side. And then we like to meet with the targets early to kind of pick and prod at this because it's much more than just the, as we've kind of talked about, it's much more than just the technology or the software development's capabilities. It's, is there a high percentage of customer support issues or bugs that manifest in customer support issues? Something is distracting the team from being able to get to the innovation work. And it could be as simple as that developers have to do QA work as well. And so you're spending high dollar for someone to do testing work that could be, you know, better done by an outsourced or a QA person that's hired and better at it anyways, and probably comes at a lot more reasonable of a cost that frees your engineers up to move faster or to focus on innovation. So there's a lot that goes into it, but I think those are good indicators that there's going to be something there, and then it's for the searcher to figure out, is the investment worth it, and does that align with success and how they're thinking about the business.
Okay, so the second thing that I classified as a red flag is the number of escalations from internal groups into engineering. And by that, I mean either a customer support or a professional services or an implementation group going to the engineering group with something that needs a change at the code level to unstick a customer. That's kind of what I mean when I say escalation. So your response to that one.
Yes, that is very much a high risk as well. That kind of comes down to where are the developers spending time and have they built things in a way that, like, a technologist's job should be, how do I work myself out of a job? That opens up the opportunity for innovation on the next thing. But if you're building a Rube Goldberg machine that you have to kind of keep behind the scenes pulling levers and twisting knobs and stuff, then that slows down customer onboarding. It hinders and potentially slows down customer support and creates this kind of single point of failure or bottleneck that a technologist is always required for all of these key pieces of the business, and they can't move harmoniously together and support each other. It kind of everything kind of grinds to a stop. So it's a good indicator you're going to have some process inefficiencies, maybe some key hires that are necessary, and potentially some software development work to help free up and kind of empower the different teams to move efficiently together versus having to be solely dependent on one single point of failure.
Yeah, if you ever talk to an individual developer and they use the phrase whack-a-mole, I would say run, run
Yeah.
very quickly in the opposite direction.
Yep.
Okay, third thing that I suggested is a high risk of technical debt. Features or products or modules specific to one customer or a very small number of customers. Your thoughts on that one?
Yeah. Yeah. That's not. We look at that as early on as we can in the process because that is usually a really strong indicator that there's going to be something there that we need to dig into, or at least we try and flag that in kind of the early stages with our clients so that they can make a decision if it's even worth spending any further money on any type of diligence, whether it's with us or any further other diligence streams, because that's typically indicative of challenges with growth and scale because they're kind of pulling a boat anchor along with these different customer customizations, and it makes for a fragile code base and very difficult to support. You're now leaning on a lot of domain knowledge of people that may be only familiar with certain customer implementations, so the team as a
Yeah.
whole can't support things. I'd say very rarely have we seen that implemented in a very creative or good way, because I don't think customization is bad if you use something like a feature flag system, or if there's a way to kind of inject things as its own isolated module, but the core of your application, all the functionality can still be iterated on and grow, and you don't have to kind of constantly support these edge cases, then I think that's good. If you can do that. Now, in reality, we don't often see that. So typically it's an indicator that there's some high risk there.
So another thing that I see, just to kind of take a quick tangent off of our lightning
Yeah, sure.
round, another thing that I often see our target companies do prior to being acquired by searchers is they'll say something to the effect of, yeah, we did some custom development work for customer ABC, but they paid us for it. We paid I'm just going to make up numbers. We
Sure.
paid our developer $100 an hour and we charged our customer $200 an hour. So at least we're getting paid for this custom work. I mean, I certainly know how I feel about that, but I'd love to get your response to that line of thinking and how searchers ought to think about that when they hear something similar from their seller.
We see it from time to time. I don't like it personally. I would say it usually manifests in early on, the business owner was looking for any way to generate revenue, and they're like, "Oh, we'll offer a professional services arm." And so, yeah, if they want customizations, why not? And that's typically kind of bringing it back to most of these targets lack a proper product discipline. It's because they don't have good customer personas or good kind of definition of what is the product we're offering, where is that fit, what are the feature sets we're going to pursue, what does our product roadmap look like. We'll give you confidence to be able to say, we hear you, we'll take that on input and maybe look for if that can serve the customer base as a whole, then we'll include it. But typically these companies are maybe strapped for cash or really eager to kind of just be the solution to everybody. And so they go off on these tangents of making a bunch of one-off stuff. So it's typically indicative that you're going to have your hands full trying to fix that or back out of that for one, and for another, you're going to have some work in kind of helping set a product vision and a direction that you kind of adhere to, that you kind of know your customer and who you're serving, and don't deviate from that just for opportunity's sake.
Yeah, and perhaps like a perfectly reasonable thing to do when you're building a company from the ground up and you're trying to acquire your first one or two or three customers. So, building a company from $0 to $2 million in revenue is very, very different from building a company from 2 million in revenue to 15 million in revenue. And what I quickly learned as a software CEO is that not all revenue dollars are created equally. Not all money is
Correct.
as green as the next person's money. The type of revenue that you can generate making a 50% gross margin on custom software development work, that's a build once, sell one time each type of proposition. But
Mm-hmm.
if you build something scalable that you can sell basically identical bits of code to 100 or 1,000 customers, that's almost purely gross margin. And that's a build once, sell many times type
Yep.
of module, which is just a very different economic proposition and a very different technical proposition as well.
Yeah, it is. And it's a hard mindset to shift out of when you've been in kind of scrappy startup mode, or kind of you haven't been able to step back and see the forest for the trees. You may not be used to thinking that way, and it's a hard mindset to shift sometimes. Yeah, it definitely is from a lack of clarity on, we've got product market fit now, so where are we going and who are we truly serving, and being diligent about staying true to that. And that just comes from a good product vision and conviction on making sure you know what segment of the market you're serving and how you're serving them, and try not to just be the Swiss Army knife of solutions to everybody.
Yeah. Okay, fourth red flag that I identified is an old technology stack. So we can maybe define that as a part of your tech stack, be it front end or back end, that has been EOL'd, is no longer supported, or perhaps is just not like the latest and greatest shiny toy.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to us about the extent to which you think that is a red flag, or perhaps not a red flag.
Yeah, I think EOL or end of life tech is a good indicator to figure out where does it sit within the system overall, how dependent is the product and the team or the company on it, and what's the path to remediation? Is it just end of life, but the technology is still supported? I think a good example to kind of lean on, there's a front end UI framework called Angular, and there's another version called Angular JS. And I'm going to mess up which version does which, but ultimately the history is that Google started this framework project as an open source project. Came out widely adopted. Everybody loved it. A lot of big companies, including enterprise organizations, adopted and made the shift to revamp their whole user interface and UX over to Angular. And then there was a major release from version 1 to version 2 that had some pretty significant breaking changes. that required significant reworking for companies to be able to migrate to that. And then Google's like, well, we're not going to support version one anymore past this date. So you have to move to version two. And a lot of companies are just like, yeah, we're not going to do that. It's not worth it because it's going to be such a huge capital investment. We're just going to maintain and carry on. Um, and then that project ended up ultimately being abandoned by Google. And then the community picked it up later on. And now there's another version of Angular out that is widely supported. And now there's this whole subclass of companies that offer extended support for the old versions of Angular, just so that large enterprises that can't afford to get off can pay them. And this company provides security updates and bug fixes. They won't improve the product, but they'll make sure that at least your threat, footprint is smaller from a security standpoint. So it's older tech can manifest in pretty expensive remediation, but then at the same time, it could just be as simple as, well, you're just on an old version and you just need to upgrade. And so you're just going to have to plan some dev cycles to do so. Another way to think about it too is there are some older languages that, you know, are widely adopted at one time, but maybe the tech community has moved away from it. Delphi is one of them. And we do look at a number of companies in the search space that 30 years ago was written on Delphi, and it's still supported, but it's a pay to play. So you got to renew and pay a license for it. It's hard to find developers that are even interested in working on that anymore. And the developers that are seasoned in it, they're starting to age out of the workforce and retire. And it would take a lot to incentivize them to leave whatever cushy job they have that they're kind of riding off into the sunset to kind of come over and help you with your thing. So those are things that we look at when it comes to old tech stack. Not all old tech is bad, but there are certain things that would manifest in a way that may be pretty hard to recover from.
The final item that I put on my list of red flags, meaning strong indicators of technical debt, is the QA operation. So this can be kind of, I guess, divided into two parts. First is just the size of the QA team, too big or too small relative to the dev team. Obviously, too small might be an indicator of technical debt.
Or
And then
non-existent
also,
at all sometimes.
or yeah, or
Yeah.
zero.
Yeah.
Um, and or the mix of manual testing versus automated testing. So just to kind of illustrate the worst case scenario, let's say we have one QA team member for every five developers, and 90% of our testing is manual. Would something like that, in your opinion, be highly suggestive of technical debt?
I mean, the short answer is yes. It makes me curious to dig in to understand why everything is manual. Is it because it's overly complex and there's not an easy way to test in isolation different functionalities or feature sets? Um, or is it just that's how they've done it and it's just easier for them to do that and they're okay with a certain degree of potential human error? I think I'm a huge fan of automated testing. As much as I hate, as a technologist, test driven development is a bit of a pain. The results from it, I think, are beneficial to the business to give confidence that you're going to break something and you can fix it before putting it out in the wild. So if there's a small or non-existent QA team, I'd say there's probably a high indicator that their bug or defect rate is going to be higher than most, if they even track that at all, or they have probably a moderate amount of customer support issues that come in that require developers to intervene or to provide feedback on. A lot of what we coach companies with now is, we with the advent of these AI tools, code assist tools, to not have testing in place, let alone automated testing, I think is kind of unacceptable at this point because these systems can go through and with some really, I wouldn't say simple prompting, but for some very pointed prompting, you can generate all of your tests automatically and then validate those yourself and then have them in your kind of lexicon of tests that run automatically before you release anything to a production environment. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there, which kind of is the other side of the coin. Yeah, maybe it's high risk, but maybe there's a huge opportunity for you to easily solve that in a way that you can maybe, stomach the initial investment for the long-term gains.
So we're going to get to the yellow flags, so to speak, but are there any red flags that we haven't discussed? Any that you think I missed?
Probably will come to me after this, but nothing comes up top of mind at the moment. I think
Okay,
the
let's dig
biggest
into
thing
the
is
yellow
saying,
flags because some of
okay,
them you might reclassify into reds or maybe
sure.
greens that we shouldn't be all that worried about it. So let's go. So by yellow flag, I mean these are likely indicators of technical debt, but more investigation is required. So first, the source and the frequency and the cadence of new releases. So by that I mean if the company is shipping new releases infrequently, or the source of those new feature ideas are largely internal as opposed to external, that might be suggestive of a high level of technical debt, but in and of itself doesn't necessarily guarantee that there's technical debt. Your response to that?
I think it's a yeah, I think it's a medium indicator, or maybe just yeah. I think it would be something that would pique my curiosity, and I'd want to understand more. And I would say typically we find frequency and cadence of new feature releases being low. There's typically something there. Either there's a process inefficiency and the business is moving the goalpost or not having really well defined acceptance criteria and fleshing out exactly what the problem is they're solving and how they're going to solve it. And so technologists are left constantly doing rework or never really hitting the finish line. We find that sometimes. But yeah, I think it's an indicator probably of most likely process related issues versus technical debt. But it could be back to your other points. There may be huge amount of custom specific code that is really fragile, or the system is architected in a way that's not easy to reason about, and so one change can have really great impact. It takes longer to test, or they just don't have a high degree of confidence in releasing things. It kind of just depends, but I think it's definitely something that should stand out that requires more research.
One of the reasons why I put this as like a yellow flag and not necessarily a red one is because, often the founder who is, often been running the company for 20, sometimes 30 years, they're kind of like the de facto head of product. So they're the people that decide what is built and when and why. Sometimes they're so busy doing a bunch of other stuff that they are the bottleneck to new feature releases. And like that's the reason why we're not releasing a lot of new products. And or maybe they're extracting great personal economics from the business.
Mm,
Therefore, they don't have a great incentive to continue growing and continue investing in R&D. And like to put it somewhat inelegantly, like they're just kind of milking the cow.
yeah,
I mean,
we've seen that
yeah,
a lot actually, and
yeah. So like something like that could, say, hey, I know our frequency and cadence and source of feature releases aren't what we would like it to be post-close, but here are the reasons why that's the case.
yeah, it's why it's important from our standpoint to really you got to understand the why. And so like those are indicators. I think you have it rightfully positioned that you want to just kind of dig a little deeper and figure out what's the why behind that. Because we do find from time to time that owners are just maybe have different motivations, and then during our interview process and we're talking to some of the technology leaders there, maybe they have strong intuition and really good sense of what they should be doing, but they're being held back because the business doesn't want it to, and there's competing interests. And at times as well it could just be that the technology is completely outsourced and there's no technically competent leader to hold the outsourced vendor accountable for the quality of
Yeah.
work they're putting in. So as the thing grows, maybe the vendor is just more purely incentivized to get the work done at any cost within a reasonable amount of time and money, and therefore they're just building, you know, hot garbage, spaghetti code or whatever it is that as it grows, it becomes harder to manage, and therefore you are slow to release new features. So it could be a lot of different things, but it is something that should indicate something to dig in deeper and to understand the
Yep.
why behind.
So second yellow flag is both the speed and the variability of customer implementations and onboarding. So, in the average implementation, there's a large percentage of time that is unbillable, or there's a large percentage of projects that come in way over their original time and materials estimates. I call that a yellow flag. Might be suggestive of technical debt, but not necessarily an automatic. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't. We've seen it manifest in the fact that it is technical debt, and you're going to have a hurdle to overcome to speed that up or to improve, acquiring new customers and scaling that quickly. In other instances, it's the market or the industry they serve or the type of product it is just very highly integrated and maybe takes
Yeah.
some time, and you require a bit of a champion inside your customers environment to help push that forward and get all of the key stakeholders to kind of keep up with the schedule you want to keep. And so you may be a little bit beholden to how fast your customers can move or how
Yep.
complicated the system is. But I balance that by, okay, well, how sticky is it once it's integrated? How hard is it to unwind? And what's their churn look like to see if that is a concern itself? But it could be indicating potential technical debt, but it may not. And that's, I think,
Yeah.
just something that is worth further investigation.
Like it could be bad scoping, it could be bad product or project management, it could be propensity to fall victim to scope creep. Like it could be any of those things. So
Yeah,
that's
or
kind of
selling
one of
to
the
the
reasons.
wrong person in the organization that you're targeting. If you
Exactly.
have something that you're trying to target a technologist, but they don't have the internal um, ability to champion that for you and still need to get sign off, then maybe you need to readjust how you're approaching it from a sales perspective first.
One of the mistakes that we made in our implementations group is for all of the most, genuine reasons, we got like a cross section of users and decision makers at our customers to kind of manage the milestones of the implementation process. We wanted everyone to have a voice, we wanted good communication, et cetera, et cetera. What we learned is that they all have different requests, they all have different timelines, they all have different levels of commitment to the implementation and its timeline. And because there's six of them around the table, there's a bit of a diffusion of responsibility in that if you have six project owners, you basically have no project owners. So that was one of the mistakes that we learned the
Yeah.
hard way is we for all the right reasons, we wanted everyone around the table, but we ended up kind of paying the price for it.
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen that happen. And I've even fell victim to that in companies that I've been a part of in the past. It's easy to do.
Okay, yellow flag number three. I mean, we did touch on this a little bit, but if there's anything left unsaid, please say it. Lack of true product management processes. Let's say there is no product management team to speak of at all, because I see that more often than not.
Yeah, there needs to be something, and it doesn't have to be overly sophisticated either. It could just be as simple as what is our overall goal and what problem are we solving as a business? Who is our customer? How do you define that? And then what do we need to do this quarter, next quarter? What's our year goal? And track it on a spreadsheet or a Google Work doc. It would be great to apply some kind of framework like the RICE framework to understand what the reach or impact, the cost and level of effort is, but it doesn't have to be sophisticated. I think it really needs to match where your team is to make
Yeah.
sure that you as a business leader have the confidence that you have set a vision correctly and that everyone's rowing in the same direction. It's often common that targets in the search space do not have proper product management or any at all. But if we do find something, it's usually handled in email or a spreadsheet or back of the napkin. It kind of varies all over the place. But then we do run into some that are very sophisticated, surprisingly. Kind of just depends.
I remember when I was hiring my CTO in 2014, I think it was, and I gave him a bit of a case study. And in this case, the case study was a collection of real problems that we kind of wanted him to solve as the new leader of the engineering organization. So in my little synopsis to him, I said, like, we don't have a lot of process for prioritizing new features and functions, or employees go straight to developers with feature requests, or it's actually the developers that decide what to work on and what not to work on. We don't gather requirements before we start writing code, all this stuff. And I'll never forget what he said to me. He said, "You don't have an engineering problem, you have a product management problem." And that was just so eye-opening for me at the time.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. Need a good champion of both the product and the tech, but also a good gatekeeper to make sure that the input's flowing in the right direction, in both directions, both from the tech out and from the business in.
Another one that I actually kind of just wrote down that I can't believe I didn't put it on my list from many years ago. What about a company that has never EOL'd or end of lifed a product before? So the products that they made in 1998 are still products that they're supporting today. Would you classify that as a high risk signal, a medium risk signal, or none of the above?
I would take it out of the frame of technical debt, or maybe I wouldn't. I guess maybe I would classify it as something that piques my curiosity, and I'd want to know why. And in instances, typically, if you found something that old that has not been kind of kept up or just sunset for the new thing, then either they've done an amazing job at keeping up with technical advancements and maintaining their software, or they're just continuing to kick the can down the road and keep this thing alive. So yeah, I would want to know a little bit of the why as to why they haven't sunset that, or if it's just evolved over time and they just have not adopted any type of major versioning or rebrand. And so maybe under the hood, it has changed drastically. But from a customer standpoint, it's business as usual. It would pique my curiosity for sure.
Okay, let's go into, I don't even know if green flags makes any sense, but we'll use green flags for lack of a better way to put it. These are lower risk, but at least possible signals of technical debt, at least in my opinion. So first is the support team, either the size of the team or any capacity issues that they might be experiencing. So for example, are they overwhelmed? Are they at 100% capacity utilization? Are tickets sitting in the queue for 2 months at a time? Is the size of the support team twice the size of the development team? And similar considerations. I classified that as a possible sign of technical debt, but maybe lower risk on the spectrum of risks. I'd like to get your reaction to that.
I may flag that kind of in the middle, honestly, because if we think about tech debt broadly and not just technology specifically, but just maybe organizational process debt or however you want to classify it, I think those are indicators. If you have a support team that is very large and has a high volume, I'm instantly curious on, well, what does the last 12 months look like? In fact, as part of our process, we ask them to provide us with 12 months of support statistics. And if it looks really crazy, I ask them for another 12 months just to really start to see what the trends or patterns look like, because those are usually indicators of either software quality issues or lack of documentation or training issues, both in-house and with your customers. It could be issues with customer onboarding. It could be a number of things, but I wouldn't say it's an indicator of no low risk or no risk. I would say it's an indicator that there's going to be one to many other things that you're probably going to uncover that have necessitated having either a really large team or you have a small team that's overwhelmed and can't keep up with the capacity.
What about the size of the development team? So, I mean, there could be a million reasons why the dev team is like asymmetrically large or asymmetrically small relative to the
Mm-hmm.
size of the organization. But if you have a very large development team and you're not seeing, them ship regularly, you're not seeing a regular cadence of new feature and function releases, or we're building with unsuitable quality. I mean, certainly that might be a sign that the company requires that many developers just to like tread water. So maybe your reaction to like the brute force metric of the number of developers, I guess, as a percentage of the total base of employees, what that may or may not tell you.
Yeah, it doesn't always signal tech debt, but more so maybe lack of direction and focus and guidance on what is important to work on or how is that time being spent. We were looking at a company recently that has 55 developers and 20 QA team members, and they need it based on the sheer size of the platform and product that they're selling to customers because there are very specific areas that they have a pod or a squad of developers working on. And so they have many different teams within the team. And so I think that's an appropriate use of a high number of developers and a need for high QA. But then on the other side, if you have that and there's no clear product strategy or any development process to hold the developers accountable for how their time is spent and what they're delivering on, then I think that it could be indicators that there may be something there. I would probably classify either having a large number or low number just on paper as a lower risk, but something that's worth investigating the why behind to
Yeah.
then figure out what is that uncovering or how does that manifest more broadly across the business.
This one might be like the least red or the least yellow specific to technical debt, but it at least might suggest that there's something to look underneath the hood on is concentration, and specifically customer concentration, but not necessarily. So I've often seen like with software companies that have a high level of either customer concentration or supplier concentration or even platform concentration. Like, for example, we develop off the Salesforce platform or something like that. If an asymmetrically large external stakeholder asks for a new feature, a new function, or a new product or whatever, often that very small software company feels basically compelled to add anything and everything that that partner requests because they're fearful of losing that relationship. And just kind of blindly saying yes to incoming customer requests is basically what creates technical debt in the first place. So maybe just your reaction to this idea of concentration being at least a flag that there's something to look more deeply into.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's not. We don't typically. We maybe bump into that adjacently in our space, but those are questions that we're asking our clients or prospective clients to understand what the space that the target is serving looks like, because that, depending on what we find there, are good indicators of what questions we should start to kind of scratch at the surface on. To your point, if you have a customer that's making up 45% of your revenue, then there's a high probability we may find some customer specific customizations, or in some instances, we've seen a business that has one version for everybody and then one version for a very specific customer that they host separately and have to then pay for and maintain. And it becomes quite cumbersome. So I think it's a good indicator that there's something to explore further. It doesn't always necessarily mean it's going to manifest in a technical debt standpoint.
Something else that I just thought of that I actually think I might throw into like the yellow flag category, meaning like a medium risk. And something that you touched on a bit earlier in our conversation is a wide range of very different customer personas. So when I bought my software company, we sold our software into five different end markets, and those five end markets were like totally unrelated to each other. So at the outset of our investment thesis, I thought this was a good thing. I thought, hey, we have proven product market fit across five different verticals. Clearly, the product is robust enough to service the needs of these five different verticals. And we're diversified. If one of our end markets goes in the toilet, don't worry, we got four other ones that can prop us up. Those were all like perfectly reasonable conclusions to come to. But when I was running a company that sounded like that, I realized that in order to accommodate those five different verticals, our product was like a one size fits all monstrosity at the code base level. And if we were selling into healthcare, almost by definition, we'd be worse than the healthcare specific provider because we had to accommodate four other different use cases from banks and insurance companies. And over time, it just became so complicated and so expensive to figure out what features to build. Would the hospitals like the feature request from the insurance companies, et cetera? Long story short, we ended up, when we sold the company, we only sold into a single end market. But that just struck me even as we were talking as like, oh, maybe that's another medium kind of risk or signal that there might be technical debt. This idea of a wide range of very different customer personas.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. Because it would make me wonder, how do they address those markets? Is it through configuration and you can just feature flag things on and off, but the features themselves are generalized enough that it really doesn't matter what you label them or how it's used, but it serves markets differently? Then maybe that's acceptable. But it could be, to your point, that you just have this wide swath of features that you have to continually maintain that are hard to scale into just one market alone, because you're trying to be the Swiss Army knife. And so you're doing a lot of things not really well instead of doing one thing
That's
really
right.
well.
That's right. What did we miss in our list of yellow, red, and green, as inelegant as a green flag is as a classification? Are there any other flags that you guys look out for during the technical diligence process that you think deserve to be highlighted?
Yeah, a couple come to mind. I think one's knowledge concentration. I think it's so important to know who's in the team and who does the ownership lean on, and who are the key people that, if we'll use a more positive analogy than maybe the bus analogy, but if they won the lottery and didn't show up to work the next day, then what stops working, or who can't do their job, who can't go on vacation or has to carry a phone around 24/7 because they're that critical? I think it's important to understand that and to understand why, and to figure out what the remediation for that is. How do you kind of back away from having a single point of failure there? And are the founders that maybe you're planning to exit the business, is one of them a key person, or is there a business continuity risk there? So I think that's a big one that we like to dig into, and I
Yeah,
think it's sometimes overlooked. Um, I'd say security is another one. It's more than just, do they have a cybersecurity insurance policy, but is there good practice more than just in the hosting of the software and the programming of the software, but is there good organizational security practices? We looked at a lot of industrial control, or kind of just supply chain based businesses this year. And one of the key things is like, how are they making sure that they're protecting against supply chain disruption? And we see a lot of rise in kind of threat actors targeting infrastructure or supply chain type businesses now. And so it kind of is on them to really make sure they're taking the right step forward to protecting against that. And interestingly enough, one of the targets was like, well, we deploy into our customer environment. It's their responsibility to secure their infrastructure. It's like on paper, yes, but you're thinking about reputational damage, brand damage, customer awareness and potential churn when you take the stance of like, well, we wrote insecure software that happened to be a pivot point, but it was our customer's responsibility to protect our network. And so just
Right.
thinking through those types of things, I think are important. Um, Maybe lack of senior technology leadership, which I guess we kind of talked on, and it kind of plays hand in hand with the product side. Um,
Can I ask you a question about that, Chris?
yeah, of
The
course.
has it makes good intuitive sense to me that a software company ought to have a leader of the software organization. But from my experience, I think I honestly got lucky because I hired a good one. But it was deeply intimidating to hire a head of engineering, whether you call that person a CTO, VP of engineering, whatever.
Yeah,
And one of the reasons why is like, A, I didn't know what questions to ask this person. And B, I didn't even know what constituted a good response because I was a non-technical CEO. But that was arguably the most important hire that I made. And I made it very early in my tenure as a CEO. I guess I benefited from luck, but there are plenty who have not benefited from luck.
yeah.
Can you talk to us about, is there any way to make that easier, making that deeply critical hire that is by definition a technical hire as a non-technical new CEO?
100%. I think you are spot on. It is one of the most important hires a new operator will make because you need somebody that's going to be your technical counterpart, your kind of right hand person that can understand when you ask or say what you want to accomplish with the business or your goals, how to translate that in a way to kind of drive a technical execution of that and to make sure that you're both speaking the same language. And that is hard to find, unfortunately. I think there's a lot of good technologists out there, but there's not a lot that can kind of straddle that line between business and tech and be able to execute on that in a way that gives an owner or operator confidence. What I would encourage people to do is there's this concept of fractional CTO. There are a lot of people like myself and others within Spellbound, beyond Spellbound, that are happy to do kind of fractional engagements to provide leadership and to kind of sit between business and tech to help provide good counsel when key decisions need to be made or if processes need to be improved or whatever it needs to be to give you the confidence that the right things are happening. And so those individuals would also most likely be happy to conduct interviews with you and to ask the right questions of like, what are you looking for? What problems do you have? And what are you trying to solve? Who are you trying to look for? And they'll help you craft a good job requirement. I can tell you how we approach it, and there are others beyond us that can be helpful in this space. And what we like to encourage our clients with is give your diligence report to a recruiter if you're going to go through the
Yeah.
process of using a recruiter. Let them read that and then have them come reach out to us and we'll discuss from our perspective what they really need from a technology leader, or let's all collaborate together to kind of help make sure that you're looking for the right people in the right places. And then we often will do follow on final interviews. So we just ask people, boil it down to your top three candidates. And maybe give us some assessment of X, Y, and Z that we can kind of give you some stuff over email to kind of guide you, but then let us do some technical assessment for you and help make
Yeah.
sure that you're kind of moving in the right direction there. Because it is a big hire and it's something that you may not know it's a bad hire until it's too late. And it's going to
Yeah.
be expensive to unwind and recover from. And that may be
Yeah.
6 months down the road or a year down the road. And so it's really important to take your time and be slow and methodical about it for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think I did about a million things wrong as a CEO. One of the few things that I did right is exactly what you just said, which is take the technical due diligence report. It wasn't written by you guys. It was written by another firm. Because I don't know if Spellbound was around back then, but
If it was
we
before
provided it.
2018, we were not.
Yeah, it was. It was quite a bit, sadly,
Yeah.
quite a bit before 2018. I provided it to CTO candidates, although I think at the time we were hiring for VP of engineering. He eventually grew into a CTO role. But I provided it to him, A, for the purposes of like transparency and honesty and communication. Hey, here's what
Yeah,
you're
we
getting
encourage
yourself
the same
into,
thing. Yeah.
right? And B, here are the list of problems to be solved. Is this something that you see yourself being willing and able to do? And it was just like a wonderful point of clarity between him and myself, saying, all right, these are the problems. These are the things that we want to solve eventually. Now let's talk about how to prioritize them and sequence them and staff them. But like, he entered with a good degree of clarity that I think probably helped him along in his first probably 12 to 24 months.
Yeah, you need to approach it eyes wide open. And then that is such a good foundation for good partnership, which is what you're going to want out of that key hire is you want
Yeah.
somebody that will be very candid with you and understands what they're getting into versus being sold a vision without understanding what the reality is first. And they can really help. Typically someone operating at that level will be very quick to self-select out if they are not well positioned or interested in helping you solve your problems. So I would not
Totally.
focus so much on trying to sell somebody the vision and trying to get them encouraged to, I won't say dupe them into joining, but trying to kind of finesse them into being excited to join, but just assess them as how well they will be as a partnership with you, and are they excited about the problems they're solving and think they can do it. And you know, groups like ourselves or others are more than happy and willing to kind of help from a technical assessment standpoint to make sure they've got the right technical acumen or ability to support you in that.
So my concluding question for you is an interesting one. I've heard or at least I think it's an interesting one. I've
Okay.
heard a somewhat contrarian take that technical debt doesn't matter. So people who subscribe to this line of thinking basically say something to the effect of, well, the market is speaking with their wallets. And if a software company has hundreds of customers paying for a product and those customers are not churning, then technical debt's kind of like a behind the curtains type issue that doesn't seem to be impacting the customer's purchase decisions. Therefore, it doesn't necessarily matter within the context of an investment thesis. I'd love to hear your reaction to that technical debt doesn't really matter thesis.
I think you can only come to that conclusion if you go in eyes wide open, asking the right questions of like, what is there? Why is it there? And what impact does it have to my vision for the company? And then it's kind of in the eye of the beholder. So maybe those individuals are willing to take a risk, and maybe they're doing a shotgun approach where they have a lot of different investments that are maybe riddled with tech debt, maybe not. And they're hoping some of them pan out and some won't. And they're just figuring out there's going to be a natural amount of attrition that's going to fail. But I think by and large, you need to be mindful of that, especially in the lower middle market space. You in search fund in particular, you are looking at traditionally older companies that are maybe less sophisticated and probably made some bad decisions along the way. Um, and how are you going to be able to rise to the occasion and adapt to that? So I think you should at least go in there aware and eyes wide open of what's there, why is it there, and what does that mean to you, to then be able to decide if you care or not. But I think a more blanket statement of like tech debt doesn't matter. I mean, in theory, yeah, everything is going to either cost something or take a certain amount of time or a certain amount of resources. So if tech debt doesn't matter, you can just fix it, sure. Or if tech debt doesn't matter, you still have customers signing up. And if churn's low and tech debt's high, I'd be pretty surprised that equation would equal out. But there's going to be some trade off somewhere, and you just either haven't found it and you haven't been bit by it yet, um, or you really just don't care at all. And that would be kind of concerning to me, as if I
Yeah.
was in the investor shoe trying to put money into something. I would, without having good understanding of that, I would not be interested.
I would say like if it's a very growth oriented investment thesis, I would completely disagree with that statement. And I would say tech debt absolutely matters in a growth oriented investment thesis. Like there is kind of like a caricature of a software investment thesis where it's certainly less important. So let's say like you buy a company at a very low multiple, it's very profitable, so you're able to put some debt on it. You have a short hold period, you cut R&D, you cut new sales, you beef up customer success. You basically try to like milk the recurring revenue, leverage the lack of churn,
Mm-hmm.
double prices because the company hasn't raised prices in 10 years, and either dividend your way to a return or take the capital that money, or pardon me, take the capital that company provides to you and use that to go acquire another company. And there are some companies kind of in and around our ecosystem that do it, not within the search ecosystem, but within the software acquirer universe more broadly. In a thesis that kind of smells like that, I can kind of understand this line of thinking that not that technical debt doesn't matter, but it's at least a lot less important in an investment thesis that kind of looks and smells like that.
Yeah, if you're looking to churn and burn and looking into just come in, stack some band-aids, get your return and move on, then tech debt's irrelevant, 100%. But I
Yeah.
think in the spirit of at least how we found search funds to operate and kind of the ethos there, it's important to consider. It's important to be aware of. It's not always a bad thing. It's just you just need to have awareness and understanding of why it's there and what does that mean to you and to
Yeah.
what success looks like for you long term.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say for anyone listening to this who's like currently evaluating a software company, and by definition, that software company will have some technical debt, just be thoughtful about actually baking it into your underwriting thesis and explicitly saying, okay, here's what we have to do. We're either going to take down profitability, or we're going to move slower, or we're going to release less, or we're going to acquire fewer customers, or we're going to double the size of team A, B, or C, or some combination of all of those things, just to explicitly account for the fact that, like, hey, we know that we're buying some technical debt and here's our plans to remediate it, as opposed to something as simple as like, we'll buy better, cyber insurance, we'll double the size of the engineering team, and off we go.
Yeah. And I'd say in the search space in particular, there's a high probability that there's a 10 out of 10 chance your investor group has opinions and perspective and experience with this, and you should lean on them. And there's, whether it's us or others, find a good technical partner to help distill and translate what you find into how that matches from a business perspective, your goals and objectives. And I think just going in eyes wide open, I think is the most important piece. But at least in the search space, there's enough resources to lean on to get support to help think through and kind of ideate on that for sure.
Chris, for folks listening to this who might want to get in touch with you, learn more about what you do, what's the best way for them to go about doing that?
Yeah, our website I think is probably the best, spellboundpartners.com. Or they're probably going to see us at a number of different search events. We try and stay pretty plugged in, but yeah, website's probably the best way to get at us.
Fantastic. Chris Smith, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time.
Steve, it was my pleasure. Appreciate the invite.